I'm Judith Ashbrook, 68 years old, and last spring, my children tried to convince me to sell the house I'd lived in for over 4 decades. The house where Erwin and I raised our 2 children and built a life that looked perfect from the outside. They said it was too much space for one woman, and maybe they were right. But what they didn't say was that they'd already found a buyer, that my son's lawyer friend had drawn up the paperwork, and that if I didn't agree, they had a plan to take it all anyway. That night at the dinner table, I listened to them talk about me like I wasn't even there, and I knew something in me had changed for good before I tell you how it all unfolded. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from, and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to stand your ground when someone tried to take what was yours. I was born in Duluth, the youngest of 4 daughters. My father drove a city bus. My mother worked nights at the post office. We didn't have much, but we had rules: show up on time, speak when spoken to take pride in your work. My sisters married young, stayed close, raised families of their own. I was the one who left. Studied medicine at a time when people still asked if women could handle the pressure. I didn't argue. I just worked harder. By the time I was 30, I was a resident in cardiology. Erwin and I had already been married 4 years. He was a young lawyer just starting out, soft-spoken but driven. We bought the house in North Minneapolis on a street lined with elms and old porches. 5 bedrooms, a sunroom. Erwin liked the study with its heavy bookshelves. I liked the garden out back. It was more than we needed, but we said we'd grow into it, and we did. Gar was born first. Then Mariel, 2 years later. We hired a live-in nanny, Rosita, from the Philippines. She stayed with us 15 years longer than most people keep a marriage, but she raised our children better than we did. Erwin was always traveling for work. I was always on call. We missed birthdays, school plays. We sent gifts instead, made promises to make it up later when Erwin passed 10 years ago. Now it was sudden. He collapsed in court, an aortic aneurysm. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. A cardiologist losing her husband to the very thing she'd spent her life treating people for the funeral came and went. The kids stayed a few days and then went back to their lives. Gar in Chicago, managing accounts for a pharma company. Mariel teaching 2nd grade just outside the city they called once a week. Like clockwork, asked about my blood pressure, about the garden, about whether I was remembering to take my vitamins. The questions always sounded rehearsed after retirement. The house started to feel different, quieter. Not peaceful, exactly. Just emptied out of its old rhythm. Sometimes I'd walk into the library and forget what I came in for. Stand there staring at a book spine, remembering the last time I read it to one of the kids. They don't come often now, maybe a few times a year, usually around holidays, always with a reason to visit: a birthday, a recital, a new laptop they needed for Ethan, or a car seat for Lillian, or help with a down payment. I always said yes. Maybe out of guilt, maybe because saying no just took more energy than writing a check last year on my birthday. They surprised me. All 4 of them showed up on the doorstep, cake in hand, smiles wide. I almost cried. I thought maybe this was the turning point. Maybe we were finally becoming the kind of family other people seem to have. The kind that meets for Sunday dinner just because they want to. And then, just as we were finishing dessert, Gar looked up from his plate and said he and Tessa were thinking of buying a new car. And I wondered then whether the visit had ever really been about me. 2 weeks later, he came back with brochures for retirement communities, ones with heated pools and bingo nights and emergency call buttons. By the bed, he said it was time I started thinking about the future. Gar called me the following Tuesday, right on schedule. That had started about a year ago, weekly check-ins that were more habit than concern. I always answered with a smile, no matter how short the call, no matter how scripted it felt. But that Tuesday, the phone never rang. By late afternoon, I tried calling him myself. No answer. I dialed Tessa's number too. Nothing. It was close to 9 when the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Gar and Tessa standing there, both dressed for travel, both looking more surprised to see me than I was to see them. "Sorry to drop in like this," Gar said, We were driving through and thought we'd stop by. Driving through? I asked. From Chicago, Tessa smiled at the floor. Gar rubbed the back of his neck. We had some things to take care of in the area. I didn't ask questions. I was just glad to see my son. I made tea while he wandered through the living room like it was the first time he'd noticed the family portraits on the wall. Tessa scrolled through her phone, one leg crossed neatly over the other. How are Ethan and Jason? I asked as I poured the tea. Good, Gar said quickly. Ethan's doing well in chemistry. Jason's still Jason. I nodded, though the truth was I hadn't seen them in person in over a year. I'd stopped sending gifts that needed sizes because no one answered my messages in time. We actually wanted to talk to you about something Gar said once we were seated. Tessa got a job offer here, a PR agency in Minneapolis. That's great, I said, and I meant it. You could stay here while you look for a place. That's kind, Mom, he said, but we've been thinking, maybe it's time you considered downsizing. I set my cup down. Downsizing. This house is huge, Tessa said, glancing around. It must be a lot to keep up with, and it's just you now. Gar leaned forward. There are really nice retirement communities, beautiful amenities, on-site care. You wouldn't be alone. And what would happen to the house? Gar didn't miss a beat. It could be sold. The market's strong. You'd get a great price. I looked at him. And the money. First, of course, your new place, he said, but the rest could help the family. Ethan's college may be even a new place for us here in town. He reached into a folder and pulled out a brochure. It showed smiling older couples playing shuffleboard under perfect skies. Tessa chimed in about social activities and how safe it would be. I sat there nodding in all the right places, saying I'd think about it. Later that night, I called Mariel. Noelle answered. She was still at school, he said, but would be home soon. Did Gar call you last night? I asked. He mentioned he stopped by, Noel said. Talk to you about some possible changes. Do you think I should move too? There was a pause, just long enough to confirm what I already suspected. Mariel thinks you'd be happier in a place with people your age. Less stress, less maintenance. I'm 68, Noel. Not 88. Of course, he said quickly. Just trying to help. After that call, I couldn't sleep. I stayed up replaying the conversation, thinking through every word, every glance, every carefully placed brochure. 2 days later, I phoned Gar. Told him I was open to the idea, maybe even interested. Suggested a family visit so we could talk through things together. He agreed so quickly it only deepened my unease. They all arrived that Saturday. Gar and Tessa from Chicago, Mariel and Noelle from the suburbs. No grandchildren, there was a school event, they said. I made a full lunch. Roast beef, mashed potatoes, vegetables the way Erwin used to like them. The conversation during the meal was light. Weather, work, summer plans. No one mentioned the house, not until I excused myself and went upstairs. The old air vent in the hallway still carried sound from the living room. I stood near it, not meaning to eavesdrop at first, but then I heard Gar's voice. She took the bait. Don't get ahead of yourself, Mariel replied. She hasn't signed anything yet. She will, Tessa said. She's lonely. This house is too much. We're doing her a favor. There was a pause, and then Noelle said it plainly. We want the house sold while she can still legally sign the papers. I didn't move. I barely breathed. G wants the money for his business, Noelle continued. We want private school for Lillian. We can't do it without her funds. She's not just sitting on that money, Tessa added. She clings to it, doles it out in bits. Like we're children asking for allowance. She's had control long enough, Gar said. Dad didn't just earn it for her. It was for the family. We need access to it before it's too late. Mariel's voice came in softer. She's still our mother. Gar answered without hesitation. Who chose her job over us? Who missed birthdays and concerts? We're not doing anything wrong. Tessa picked up from there. We'll try to do this nicely, but if she resists, she won't, Gar said. Dr. Rodriguez already drafted a statement. If needed, we go to court. Prove she's not capable of managing her finances. She forgets things Noel said. We can use that. Make the case for temporary guardianship. She won't know what hit her, Tessa finished. I stood there, one hand braced against the wall. The hallway felt colder than before. They came here for my future, they'd said, for my well-being. But I'd just heard them plan how to take everything from me, my house, my accounts, my independence. When I came back down, I smiled, asked for coffee, listened while they told me again how wonderful the new community was, how happy I'd be. I asked questions, nodded in the right places. I even thanked them for caring. By the time they left, promising to follow up soon, I had already decided what I would do. The morning after they left, I pulled an old spiral notebook from the top shelf of my closet. I hadn't opened it in over 15 years. Back when Erwin was still alive, I used to jot things down, patient updates, professional notes, names of people I could trust. Now, for the first time in years, I flipped through the pages looking for one name in particular. Eleanor Parker. A former nurse. A friend. She'd spent the last 2 decades working as a patient advocate for older adults, especially those facing family disputes. I hadn't spoken to her in almost a year, but when she picked up the phone, she sounded exactly the same. Dee, she said, using the old nickname only Erwin and a handful of people ever used. What's wrong? I told her everything. Not just the conversation I'd overheard, but the way they'd smiled while asking me to give up my home. The brochures. The way they'd spoken to each other when they thought I was asleep upstairs. Eleanor didn't interrupt. When I finished, she let out a breath. They're not just being pushy, she said. They're laying the groundwork to take control of everything. If they've already spoken to a lawyer and a doctor, they could act fast. I thought maybe if I stalled, told them I was still thinking. That's not enough, she said. If they're serious about this, and it sounds like they are, then you need to act now. First, get a full medical evaluation from someone you trust. Something official on paper showing you're of sound mind. If they try to go to court, that document will save you. I wrote it down, and second, she continued, you need to know what they're actually planning, who this lawyer is, what papers they've prepared. If your son already used your medical power of attorney to try anything, that's another problem. How would I even find that out? I'll give you a name, she said. Roy Taylor, private investigator, discreet, efficient. He's done this kind of work before. I hesitated. The idea of hiring someone to look into my own children made my stomach turn. Judith, she said gently, you need facts, not hopes. I thanked her, hung up, and dialed the number she gave me. Roy Taylor showed up at my house 2 days later. Late 50s, ex-police, now working privately. He wore a clean jacket, spoke with care, and didn't take notes until I finished speaking. He asked for names, timelines, every detail I could remember about the conversations I'd overheard. Then he leaned back in his chair. I can find out what you need, he said. I'll start with your children's finances, this lawyer Jeff and the Dr. Rodriguez. I'll also check out any mention of a buyer for your house. Sometimes these things are more coordinated than they appear. How long will it take? Depends how deep we go. A few weeks for a basic report. Longer if you want everything. I don't have weeks, I said. They're expecting an answer soon. He nodded. I'll prioritize the lawyer and the doctor. If they've already drawn up paperwork, I'll know. He stood to leave, then paused. Are you sure you want to know all of it? I've spent my life working in cardiology, I said. We don't ignore symptoms. We investigate them. He smiled and left. I watched him go, notebook still in my lap. That same week, I called Dr. Howard Stein, a neurologist and former patient of mine. I scheduled a full cognitive workup. The next day, I met with my financial advisor, David Goldman, and asked him to flag any recent activity on my accounts, especially inquiries made without my knowledge. Every phone call, every appointment, every signature was a step forward. But the nights were harder. I'd sit in the quiet hearing old laughter in the walls. The smell of Irwin's aftershave still lingered in the closet by the study. I wasn't just protecting my money, I was holding on to the only place that had ever been mine. 2 weeks later, Roy Taylor called. "I've got something for you," he said. "I'd rather go over it in person." He arrived that evening with a thick manila folder. We sat in the living room. I offered him tea. He declined. He placed the folder on the coffee table and opened it. "Let's start with your son," he said. Gar had made several high-risk investments in recent years, including a biotech company that collapsed. After the loss, he'd moved money around chasing bigger returns. None of it had worked. As of now, he was carrying over $400,000 in personal debt. High interest, some close to default. I didn't say anything. Roy continued. About 8 months ago, he took out a $120,000 loan, in your name. I looked up. He used the medical power of attorney you signed when you had knee surgery. He forged the signature on the loan documents. My hands were still. I looked at the printouts. Loan paperwork with my name, his signature, my forged consent. Does Tessa know? Doesn't look like it, Roy said. She's under the impression their finances are tight, but not desperate. He flipped a few pages. Now your daughter, Mariel's financial situation is better, but not by much. She and her husband have significant credit card debt. They're looking into private school for Lillian, something they can't afford. He tapped another page. Noel's been altering financial reports at his company. Small things, but enough to hide shortfalls. That's forgery. I didn't look at that page, Roy continued. As for Mariel, she's been telling people you're declining. Friends, former co-workers. There are mentions in messages and emails of forgetfulness, confusion. She's laying a narrative. He pulled out a photo of a middle-aged man. This is Jeff Coleman, attorney, family law, guardianship specialist, works quietly. He's drafting papers now, petition for financial custody citing cognitive decline. And the doctor, Eduardo Rodriguez. Psychiatrist, friend of Gar's. Never met you. But he's already signed a preliminary letter based on the stories they've fed him. It's enough to justify a temporary guardianship hearing, at least in early stages. I sat back in my chair. The room didn't feel like mine anymore. There's more, he said carefully. Tessa's been involved with Gar's boss, Richard Jenkins. It's an affair, and it's not just personal. She's been using the relationship to help Gar get promoted. There's a paper trail. He handed me a separate envelope. Photos, restaurant bills, one hotel receipt, a copy of an email recommending Gar for a role he wasn't qualified for. I closed the envelope. What you do with this is up to you, Roy said. But you have the truth now. He left. I sat with the folder in my lap for a long time. At some point, the clock in the hallway chimed. I hadn't noticed how dark it had gotten. I stayed up the rest of the night reading every page, every note, every photo. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I read until there was nothing left to read. By morning, I called Eleanor again. I need a lawyer, I said. Not to sue, not yet. Just to prepare. 3 days after Roy left my house, I met with a lawyer named Martha Livingston. Eleanor had recommended her. She was in her 60s, sharp as a pin, and had a calmness about her that made it easy to breathe in her office. She let me lay everything out. The forged loan, the doctor's letter, the legal paperwork my son's friend was preparing behind my back. I gave her copies of Roy's findings and asked for one thing to help me protect what was still mine. We worked together for the next several days. I updated my will, locking down clear stipulations for how the estate would be handled. I set up a trust, not the one Gar had hoped for, but one with strict conditions and limited access. The bulk of it would go elsewhere. I also arranged for my medical records to be reviewed and confirmed by 2 separate doctors, both of whom gave me clean evaluations in writing. I met again with David Goldman, my financial advisor, and we shifted a significant portion of my assets into instruments Gar wouldn't be able to touch, even if he tried again with a power of attorney. I revoked the old one and filed the paperwork myself. I made copies of everything. One for me, one for Martha, one sealed in the safety deposit box I'd kept since Erwin's passing. It took less than 10 days to rewrite the map they thought they were navigating. Then I made a phone call. The Azure was a restaurant Erwin and I had always loved, classic, private, expensive. The owner, Antonio Pereira, had once been my patient. Years ago, I treated him after a heart scare, and since then, he'd insisted I never needed a reservation. When I called to ask for a favor, he said yes before I even explained. "I'd like to reserve the back room," I told him. "I need space for a presentation." He asked no questions, said he'd prepare the audio and video system himself, said I could trust him with whatever I needed. I chose my birthday for the dinner. Not a milestone year, but it gave them a reason to show up. I called Mariel first, told her I was planning a special evening. "I want to celebrate with everyone," I said, "and I'm ready to talk about the house." She hesitated just long enough for me to hear her wheels turning. Then she said yes. Gar called later that night. "Do you want us to bring anything?" he asked. I told him just themselves. The week before the dinner, I spent every evening in my study going through Roy's files and gathering what I needed. I created a slideshow. Simple slides, nothing flashy, just facts. Loan documents, emails, text messages. One by one, I set the truth in motion. The morning of my birthday, I walked through the house one more time. I paused at the photograph in the hallway. Gar at 12. Standing on the front porch in his Little League uniform glove tucked under his arm. Erwin had taken that photo on a Saturday morning before a game I missed because of a patient's emergency surgery. I looked at that boy's face and wondered what he'd think of the man he became. The sun was low when I arrived at the restaurant. Antonio greeted me at the entrance. He led me through the main dining room and into the private space at the back. Everything was ready, the table set with silver and white linens, the screen hidden in the ceiling above us. "Just give the waiter the signal," Antonio said. "He'll handle the rest." Gar and Tessa arrived first. He wore a navy sport coat. She wore a cream-colored dress that matched her handbag. They gave me a wrapped box with a bracelet inside, delicate, tasteful, and exactly the kind of gift meant to impress without asking questions. 10 minutes later, Mariel and Noel walked in. They brought perfume. Not a scent I used, but something expensive enough to signal effort. We sat, ordered drinks, made polite conversation. I noticed how carefully they all avoided the subject of the house. They didn't want to ruin the setup they thought they'd constructed. Gar raised his glass first. To Mom, he said, "The strongest woman I know. Happy birthday." We all toasted. I sipped my champagne and waited. Dinner was drawn out, appetizers, entrees, dessert. I let them talk about the weather, the boys' summer programs, Lillian's upcoming recital. I didn't interrupt. I didn't steer. When the dessert plates were cleared and the coffee was poured, I folded my hands on the table. "I know why you're here," I said. "You want to know what I've decided about the house?" They froze for half a second, then recovered. Gar leaned forward slightly, his tone casual. "We just want what's best for you, Mom." "I've decided to sell," I said. Mariel exhaled. Tessa reached for her wine glass. Gar nodded, his voice smooth. "I think that's wise. We found a wonderful complex with full-time care and I won't be moving into a retirement community, I said. I've put in an offer on a condo in Naples, Florida, walking distance to the beach. Gar blinked. Naples, I've wanted to live by the water for years. I think it's time. There was silence. I've already hired a realtor, I added. The house should sell quickly. Gar recovered. That's great. That gives you some freedom. And with the difference in value, there'll be roughly 1.7 million left over, I said. More than enough to invest. I've also decided to set up a trust. He straightened, too eager. That's a smart move. I can help with that if you want. I've done some investing myself. I turned slightly. Yes, I remember. The biotech firm, the stock trading. Tessa's smile faltered. Gar cleared his throat. Everyone makes a few mistakes, no doubt, I said. But this isn't about mistakes. I nodded toward the waiter. The lights dimmed. The screen dropped from the ceiling. I heard someone shift in their seat. What is this? Mariel asked. A little something I've prepared, I said. For my birthday. The first slide appeared. Gar's name, then the forged loan document, his debt summary, a spreadsheet showing interest rates and missed payments. I didn't narrate. I didn't need to. Tessa leaned forward, staring at the screen. Is this real? Gar didn't answer. Then came Mariel's turn, her emails to the lawyer, texts to a friend about my confusion and forgetfulness, notes referencing the plan to initiate guardianship proceedings. Noel looked at her, but she didn't look back. Then the company documents, altered reports, signatures, financial discrepancies. Roy had been thorough. Finally, the photographs. Tessa and Richard Jenkins. The hotel. The lunch. The kiss. No one spoke. I raised my glass again, not to toast, but to pause. I thought you should see what I see, I said. The full picture. They sat in silence, the only sound the soft hum of the projector as the screen lifted back into place. Tessa was the first to speak. Her voice cracked just slightly. You've been spying on us. I looked across the table at her, then at Gar. No, I said evenly. I've been protecting myself. There's a difference. Gar leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowed, jaw tight. You went through our finances, hired a private investigator. You gave me reason to, I replied. You forged a loan in my name, Gar. Used a power of attorney that was never meant for anything beyond a medical release. You went to a doctor I'd never met and convinced him to write a statement saying I was confused. That I needed oversight. Tessa shifted in her chair. Gar didn't respond. I turned to Mariel. And you, I asked, did you really think I wouldn't notice the way you've been rewriting the story for everyone else, whispering that I was slipping, sending emails full of concern while lining up guardianship papers? Mariel's voice was barely above a whisper. I thought we were helping. Noel's chair creaked. He hadn't spoken all evening. Now he cleared his throat and said softly, We shouldn't have pushed. Gar shot him a look, but Noel stared down at the table. I folded my hands. I invited you here tonight because I wanted to give you the courtesy of hearing it from me directly. Not from a lawyer. Not from a court notice. From your mother. They didn't move. I've spent the last few weeks taking steps to protect my estate. The house is going on the market next week. I've already placed a deposit on the condo in Florida. The sale will be handled through a secure trust. All legal power of attorney documents have been revoked and rewritten. And I've closed the line of credit you opened in my name, Gar. His face flushed. I was going to pay it back. You never should have touched it. For a long moment, the only sound was the soft clink of a spoon against a saucer. The waiter refilled the coffee cups without saying a word. Gar finally spoke again, this time quieter. What about the trust? It's done, I said. but it doesn't look like what you were expecting." I opened my purse and pulled out a plain white envelope. I passed it to Gar. Inside was a letter. 1 page, typed and signed. It outlined the terms of the trust. A percentage for Lillian to be held until she was 25. A percentage for the boys. Everything else to the James Irwin Foundation, a heart research organization Irwin and I had supported for over 30 years. Gar read the letter and didn't look up. "There's nothing for us," Mariel said. "There's no control for you," I said. "There's no way to touch it, no backdoor access, no investment schemes. There's a future for your children if they earn it, and if they don't, the funds stay in the foundation." Tessa leaned forward. "You're punishing all of us." "No," I said. "I'm setting a boundary." She looked away. I reached into my purse again and placed 3 small boxes on the table. 1 for each of them. They hesitated before opening them. Inside each was a photograph. The first was Gar, as a child, standing next to Irwin at the front steps holding a kite. The second was Mariel at her piano recital, age 9, beaming with pride. The third was a photo of both of them, Gar, Mariel, and me, at a community picnic back when the world still felt simple. "I wanted to remind you of who you were," I said, "and who I was." They looked at the pictures in silence. "You were my children," I continued. "I loved you. I gave you every bit of myself. And when Irwin died, I thought maybe we'd grow closer. Instead, you turned this house into a chessboard. You played your pieces, and now the game is over." Gar stood up. "You think this is over? We can fight this. You can try," I said. "But everything I've done is legal. Documented, witnessed, filed." Tessa stood too and grabbed her purse. Gar followed. They didn't say goodbye. Mariel stayed seated for another minute. Her voice was quiet. "I didn't mean for it to go this far." I nodded, but it did. She stood. Noelle followed. They left without another word. When the door closed behind them, I sat back and exhaled. Antonio came in and cleared the table without saying anything. Then he placed a small candle on a dish in front of me and lit it. "Happy birthday, Doctor," he said gently. I looked at the flame for a long time before blowing it out. 3 days after the dinner, I woke to find a thick manila envelope on my doorstep. No note, no return address. Inside were documents from Gar's lawyer, an official petition challenging my competency and requesting an emergency guardianship hearing. The date was already set for the following Monday. I made 2 phone calls, one to Martha Livingston, one to Eleanor. Martha reviewed the packet over the phone and told me not to worry. She'd expected it. Everything we'd prepared would hold up. She filed a counter-petition that same afternoon, attaching the 2 independent medical evaluations, the revoked power of attorney, and a sworn affidavit from Dr. Nesbitt himself, clarifying that he'd been misled. Eleanor came by that evening with a tray of baked ziti and a bottle of iced tea. We ate in the sunroom. I told her about the court hearing and what to expect. She said she'd be there. She also said something else, that Roy had uncovered something more. About Gar, I asked. "No," she said. "About Tessa." I waited. "She's not just linked to that biotech firm he lost money in," Eleanor said. "She was listed as a silent partner, on paper at least. The firm went under 3 years ago after an audit. There's still a federal investigation open." I sat back. "She's not clean," Edith Eleanor added. "Not even close." The court date came. I wore a navy dress and my mother's old brooch. Eleanor sat behind me. So did Martha and a paralegal. Gar arrived with a different lawyer than the one who sent the packet. Mariel didn't come. The judge was a woman in her late 40s, sharp, direct, and efficient. She listened carefully as Gar's attorney presented the claim that I was showing early signs of dementia, citing the same doctored medical note and referencing erratic behavior over the past year. Then Martha stood. She spoke plainly. She introduced the letters from 2 board-certified neurologists. She presented a timeline showing when the forged documents were submitted, when financial transfers had occurred, and how Gar had acted outside the scope of the original power of attorney. She submitted Roy's report. She asked for everything to be entered into the record. When it was over, the judge took less than 10 minutes to decide. Petition denied, she said. All previous documents presented by the petitioner are hereby invalidated. Mrs. Wembley retains full autonomy. This court sees no grounds for guardianship proceedings at this time. Gar didn't look at me. He walked out of the courtroom before the judge had even finished speaking. Martha turned to me and gave a slight nod. "It's done," she said. That night, I slept for 10 straight hours. I woke to light rain and the sound of wind brushing through the trees outside the bedroom window. The house felt still. Not empty, just still. 2 days later, Mariel called. She didn't ask how I was. She didn't ask about the court case. She got straight to the point. "Lillian's asking questions," she said. "She wants to know why you aren't coming to her dance recital." "I wasn't invited." There was a pause. "She thinks you're mad at her." "She's a child," I said. "She doesn't understand what you tried to do. She loves you." "I love her too." Another pause. "Then come," Mariel said. "Just show up." I considered it. Not because of Mariel, but because I remembered what it felt like to wait in the wings at age 10, scanning the audience for someone who said they'd be there. I showed up. I sat in the back row next to a woman I didn't know. Lillian danced fourth in the program. She wore a blue leotard and a silver headband. Her number lasted 2 minutes and 12 seconds. When she saw me in the audience, she smiled so wide her cheeks shook. She waved once. I waved back. Then I left quietly before intermission. A week passed. Then 2. Then a letter came. It was handwritten. Neat, careful script. Not Mariel's. Not Gar's. It was from Lillian. She wrote that she was glad I came. That she missed sitting on the porch eating strawberries. That she didn't understand everything that was happening. But she knew people were angry, and she hoped it would go away. There was a drawing tucked into the envelope. It showed 2 people sitting under a tree. One of them had white hair. The other had ballet slippers. I kept the letter. Gar didn't call. Tessa sent one text message that read, "I hope you're happy." I didn't respond. Noel came by once. He didn't stay long. Said he was sorry. Said he hadn't known what Mariel was planning. I believed him. By the time the realtor listed the house, I was ready. I walked each room again, took pictures of the garden, labeled the photo albums, packed the piano music, and sent it to Lillian with a note that said, "This was your mother's favorite." Then I booked my flight to Florida. The plane touched down just after noon. I gathered my small bag from the overhead and followed the line of passengers through the jet bridge. It had been over 15 years since I'd set foot in Florida. The sunlight coming through the glass windows of the terminal looked thinner than I remembered, brighter, but cooler somehow. I hadn't told anyone my exact arrival time. I hadn't needed to. Outside baggage claim, a familiar car idled at the curb. A white Ford Taurus, a little rust on the side, a tiny crack in the left brake light, Eleanor's car. She leaned against the passenger door with her arms crossed and a paper cup in hand. When she spotted me, she smiled, then flicked her sunglasses up into her hair. "I figured you'd come through Terminal B," she said as I walked up. "You figured right." She opened the trunk, and I placed my suitcase inside. As I settled into the passenger seat, she handed me the coffee. "Just the way I like it, half and half, no sugar." The drive to the rental house took 30 minutes. It was a single-story ranch on a quiet cul-de-sac, pale yellow with green shutters. Eleanor had already arranged everything: utilities, groceries, even a gardener. The fridge had eggs, milk, and strawberries. The linen closet was stocked. She'd left a note on the counter that said, "Call me when you're ready. No rush." I called her that evening. She came over the next day with a binder. "This is everything," she said. "Roy pulled all the financials. There's a paper trail." We sat at the kitchen table. I flipped through page after page: bank statements, trust account withdrawals, loan documents. All of it tied back to Gar. But what caught my attention wasn't just the numbers. It was a purchase made 6 months ago. A house. Under Tessa's name, but funded through a joint account that Gar hadn't disclosed. "Where is this?" I asked. "Naples," Eleanor said. "It's listed as a short-term rental. Luxury property. 5 bedrooms, pool, 2-car garage. They've been moving assets into it slowly." I kept turning pages. More wire transfers. More withdrawals. And then tucked behind the final divider was a single page marked "Confidential." A letter addressed to Tessa from a man named Richard L. Greer, senior investigator with the Office of Inspector General. It confirmed that she was a named subject in a pending case involving investment fraud and misrepresentation. "I thought this had been buried," I said. "It was," Eleanor replied, "until Roy found the name through a background check. The case is still open. No formal charges yet. But they're watching her." I closed the binder. "What happens now?" I asked. Eleanor took a slow sip of tea. "Now we move the pieces into place." The next few days passed quietly. I read. I walked the neighborhood in the mornings. I called Lillian once, and we talked for 15 minutes about her new tap shoes and a science fair project involving celery and food coloring. I didn't mention her parents. She didn't ask. Then the call came. It was from Martha Livingston. "Are you sitting down?" she asked. "I can be. Gar's being audited. The IRS flagged one of his filings from last year. A large deduction tied to a property donation. Only the property doesn't exist." I said nothing. "He's hired counsel," she added. "But the investigation's real. And from what Roy's already submitted, it won't go quietly." That evening, I sat on the back porch and watched the lizards dart across the fence posts. I thought about the house in Minneapolis. Whether someone had moved in yet. Whether they'd noticed the tiny pencil marks on the wall in the pantry where we used to measure the kids' heights every year on New Year's Day. Eleanor came by the next morning. "Are you ready?" she asked. "For what?" "For what comes after." We drove to a bank in Sarasota. There I met with a trust officer and signed new documents transferring all remaining funds, everything I hadn't already moved, to a newly structured trust overseen by a third-party fiduciary with strict disbursement clauses. I named 2 beneficiaries, Lillian and Noel. Gar and Mariel were not listed. That same day, Eleanor delivered the final reports to the local authorities and the IRS regional office. The supporting documentation had been reviewed, notarized, and logged. There would be hearings. There might be charges. By nightfall, the wind picked up. A summer storm rolled through just before 10. I listened to the rain hit the windows as I sat by the kitchen counter, flipping through one of Irwin's old paperbacks Eleanor had brought from the house. In the morning, there was a message on my phone. It was Gar. He didn't leave a greeting, just a sharp breath followed by 7 words. "What did you do?" "Mother?" I didn't call him back. Not that day. Not the next. I listened to that message a dozen times over, and each time it felt a little smaller, a little less sharp, until all that remained was the silence after his question. "What did you do, Mother?" he'd asked, as if I'd tipped something over. As if what he'd built wasn't already crumbling under the weight of its own lies. Eleanor drove me to the courthouse the following week. We weren't needed for the hearing, just observers, but I wanted to be there. Gar sat with his attorney on the left side of the room. Tessa was absent. I watched him from the second row. He looked thinner than I remembered, tired. His hands fidgeted under the table the same way he used to when he was a boy and thought he was about to get caught. When the judge acknowledged the audit findings, there was no outburst, no drama. Just a quiet confirmation of the facts. Multiple transfers, false deductions, assets rerouted through shell accounts. Enough to trigger an investigation, and enough for the IRS to move forward. The civil charges would come first. The criminal ones might follow. Outside the courthouse, Eleanor and I stood under a stone awning while the rain started up again. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel anger either, just a stillness, like I had finally stepped out of something I didn't realize I'd been carrying for years. 2 weeks later, I flew back to Minnesota. Lillian met me at the airport with a sign she had made from construction paper. It said, "Welcome home, Grammy," in thick blue marker, all caps with glitter tape on the corners. Noel stood beside her holding a balloon that said, "You did it," probably recycled from a graduation party. I crouched down and hugged them both, and for the first time in a long time, I felt sure I was exactly where I belonged. We spent the summer together. I helped Lillian bake cookies for her dance recital fundraiser. I watched Noelle build a solar-powered car out of scraps from the garage. At night, we played card games in the living room with old jazz records playing in the background. The house didn't feel haunted anymore. It felt lived in. It felt safe. Gar never came by. I heard through Eleanor that he'd settled the civil charges with a fine. The criminal case was still under review. Tessa had left town. Mariel filed for separation quietly through a local firm. I never spoke with her again. In the fall, I updated my will. Eleanor helped me put everything in place clean, simple, protected. Lillian and Noel's names were at the center of it, woven into every clause. There would be no loopholes this time, no games, just legacy passed forward with care. One afternoon in early October, I sat by the front window with a cup of chamomile tea and watched the maple trees begin to turn. The light came in softer now, golden, and stretched thin over the floorboards. I thought about Erwin, how he'd once told me that doing the right thing wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was quiet, steady, like keeping a light on in the dark, even when no one else could see it. That's what this felt like. If you're still listening, thank you. And if you've ever had to choose between keeping peace and standing up for what's right, I hope you know this. It's never too late to protect the truth, or the people who matter most. Take care of yourself. And if this story meant something to you, share it with someone who might need it. I'll be here next time.